Hey guys, David Pingree here, doing our dialed in video on the KTM's 2020 250 SXF. We've got a lot of time on this thing now here, and we've come up with some pretty good settings for you. A couple little things we want to pass along. We'll start with the engine on this thing. Again, 1 and 2 maps. 1 is sort of a standard map. 2 is going to be a little bit more aggressive. I always, on these 250s, I always just keep it in that aggressive map. If I want it to be a little bit more tame or mellow, I throw that traction control on, and that actually does seem to really modulate the power better for you, kind of helps if it is slick, if there's traction issues. But I think most people are going to like that 2 map. It's just better on a 250. 350, 450, I kind of tend to go the other direction and like it a little more mellow and usable. But on these guys, I would say most people are going to like that number 2 map, so make sure you try it. And then the traction control, again, it's got a different feel on this bike because you're not breaking loose as hard and quick as you would on the bigger bikes. So for me, if there's decent traction, I leave it off because I can actually feel it when I've got it on. But definitely the big key with this is to play with it. Every track you go to, try it, turn it on, turn it off. I mean, it's as easy as just holding it down for a second, it turns on and off. So you've got to really be comfortable with this in order to utilize this as a tool, because it does have a lot of benefits. You just got to know when and how to use it. So that's my recommendations there. I didn't like the traction control unless it's really slick, and I like the number 2 map pretty much all the time. I think that'll be a pretty common feeling for everybody. The motor on this thing screams, and as long as you aren't in deep sand or rainy, wet conditions, run this vented side plate. On the big bikes, they added the vented side plate and had to do a mapping change to accommodate it. They didn't have to on this bike. Just opening this up really lets this bike breathe and pops up the numbers from mid to top. This thing's an animal, and you can feel it. And in the past, that's why you'd see all the race teams drilling holes out in this airbox, because it's a change that works. You just want to make sure if you're in really sandy conditions or it's super wet, protect your bike a little bit there and probably throw the fully covered one back on. But gearing is really good. If you can keep from going up a tooth, I think it's a good thing. I think people that bump this up a tooth end up over revving it, and yes, it will rev far, but really if you can keep it in that middle to top instead of very, very top, the handling works a lot better, and that's true on any motorcycle. So you start bumping up teeth, unless you're 200 plus, it really isn't necessary. Just work on carrying more corner speed and getting those RPMs up as you start feeding the clutch in. That would be my recommendation there. Jetting's really good. Nothing else really discussed on this motor. It's a rocket ship, and not a lot else you can adjust other than that. Suspension, I think, is where this bike, it gets really particular. And the thing that's crucial is getting your balance right, and you're going to do that with your air pressure. So standard is 10.3 bar. Clickers are 15 out on the compression, 18 out on the rebound. That's standard. I ended up going softer on my compression because my initial, when I set it at 10.3 and the clicks were in the standard position, it just felt a little firm. So we opened it up 4 clicks softer to get a front and back, just to give it a little bit more compliant feel, and it was diving too much. So then we bumped up the pressure to 10.5 bar, and it was better, but I was still a little bit divey. So 10.6 is where we went on the bar, and I found my happy place. And that makes all the difference on the world on these bikes, all these KTMs, is finding that balance with the fork. When it was too soft, anytime I was in a sweeper or I'd land off a jump, the front end felt like it wanted to tuck. It's like having a fork spring that's much too soft for you. You get a really unstable feeling in the front end. As soon as I hit that sweet spot, which for me was 10.6, again, if you're heavier, I'm 170. If you weigh more than that or you really ride over the front, it could be a little bit higher than that. But really don't be afraid to adjust those numbers up and down depending on your weight and your riding style to find where you're comfortable. Because once I hit 10.6, the front end holds up where it's supposed to be. I still got my clicks 4 out from standard, so it gives it that a little bit softer feel initially that I wanted, while still holding it up in the right part of the stroke. So as soon as I got that, man, the comfort level came back. I was able to really start pushing hard. So that is, to me, the biggest key with this bike is getting that air pressure right in the fork and balancing that with the back. In the back, they're recommending 105 millimeters of sag, and I wouldn't stray from that. If you start adding more sag to accommodate, like to match the front, you're going to run into problems just with all the numbers adding up. 105 is really where you want to be, so don't veer too far from that. try to make that adjustment with the fork, because the shock will accommodate a really wide range of weights and speeds, but the fork has all the adjustment to sort of help with the balance. If you do find it still a little bit too tall, you can open up that high-speed compression. It comes out at 2 turns out as standard. You can open that a quarter or a half turn and get it. It'll sit a little bit lower for you, have a little bit more, a little bit of a softer feel. But just know that high speed turns into low speed. So even though you get to sag more, it's also going to feel softer in all of the bumps that you're hitting too. So just keep that in mind. We did not mess with fork height. Initially, I thought, maybe I'll drop the fork and the clamps a little bit. And if you're racing somewhere that's really high speed, they come at the second line here, and I would definitely consider dropping them down to the first. But I'm at Glen Helen, where there's some really high speed stuff, and by getting that bar, the pressure right in the fork, I didn't have to do it. But it is something to try. We may run through that later just to see, but right now I'm really happy with it, so I didn't want to mess with it. One more little trick that I just throw at you. They have a couple of rubber O-rings that sit on the sliders of the forks on these bikes now. And this is kind of an old school trick. We used to use zip ties, but you slide it all the way up before you go out on the track, and when you come in, look at it right away and see how much of the stroke you're using. That'll give you a really good idea where you're at with that spring rate. If you're only going 3/4 of the way down, you're too stiff. If you're mashing that thing to the bottom all the time, might want to add a little bit of pressure and see if you can bring it up a little bit. So it's a very good tool. Use it. And you've got to look at it kind of right when you pull in. If you ride several motos and look, the vibration will just run the things down, so it's not an accurate reading. But use that tool. It's another awesome feature that KTM's added. This does come with the short throw throttle cam, so don't worry about changing that. That's something the 250 already comes with that. If you do have a 350 and 450, know that there's options for that cam, and getting the shorter throw cam helps a lot. Just makes it easier to ride. You're not twisting as far. Helps me with arm pump, not having to rotate as far. No other issues or suggestions on this thing. It comes really ready to go. There is adjustment with bar positioning and stuff like that. If you're a guy with shorter feet, you're going to want to look at some different brake and shifter options, some aftermarket companies, because they are pretty far out. It seems like they're made for like a size 10 or 11 boot, and as a size 8 boot, I feel like sometimes I'll go to shift and I completely miss it. Just something that is unique to these bikes. But all in all, awesome motorcycle, incredible motor, which that's a big part of racing in the 250 class if you're racing competitively, is having a strong bike. This is definitely that. The upgrades to the suspension this year helped a lot. I think if you start with those couple of settings, like in the shock, again, I went 4 clicks softer to match the front, and that was it. Sag at 105, didn't touch rebound, and it feels great. So that's it. Really, really simple to get this thing running. Try that second map. Play with the traction control, but I think if it's good traction, leave it off. It's my recommendation to you. So with those, I think you're going to have a competitive starting point. Enjoy your 2020 KTM. I'll see you guys on the next test.